Back with the 72 Cutlass Supreme. We have a good clean gas tank on the inside, but on the outside it has a lot of surface rust. So I want to reuse the gas tank, try to save a little bit of money, but I can't install it rusty like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to clean it and paint it. I have the rest of the car pretty much cleaned up. Now as I'm adding parts, I'm either putting new parts or trying to clean up and restore the existing parts. So that's what we're going to do with this gas tank. So we're going to get a Harbor Freight grinder with the wire wheel, and we're just going to knock off that surface rust. And it has a couple of dents. We're going to fix the dents. And the tank has been sitting for a long time, so it's dry, no fumes. So we should be good to go. So let's get started. I'm not a professional on this. I'm just doing this for fun. And you always want to use ear protection, eye protection, have an N95 mask because that dust is pretty nasty, and gloves. And you always want to be safe. You don't want to have any injuries while you're trying to do something to save a few bucks.
As you can see, I'll do it different angles. The wire wheel is working. It's taking all the surface rust off. It's not causing any sparks. This gas tank has been sitting empty for about 10 years, so there's absolutely no fumes whatsoever inside this tank. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be attempting this. So I think it's going to work out fine if I can get from here to here with that wire wheel. And then I'll maybe scuff it down after that. Degrease it, of course, before we prime it. All right, let's keep on going. All right, guys, moving along. It's a messy job. It's working. The surface rust is coming off. This got hot on me. I could tell just by the heat. I'm gonna let it cool down. Switch over to another wire wheel. Put these plugs on because I know it's not good for your ears. So
this kind of work is not recommended to do at home if you have pets around, children around playing in the yard, or if you're working in the yard or in the garage, children around. What I noticed is the wire wheel, as it spins so fast and it gets pressure, some of the wires come off and they just shoot out like a dart. So this can be very dangerous. Be sure you don't have any items close by that could get damaged, like a car. It could hit a car or something. So moving along here, I used wire brushes and even 80 grit sandpaper in certain hard to get areas that the grinder was not able to reach.
I was able to get with both wire wheels. I've got debris underneath the hoses, some little hidden areas, and I'm going to get that with wire brush, small wire brushes, sandpaper. But anyhow, it's coming out okay.
There was a couple of small dents in the gas tank. So what I did is I got Z-Grip body filler. And when you're working with body filler, be sure that the area that you're working, like your workbench, is nice and clean, because you don't want any contaminants to get into your body filler, because it just makes spreading the body filler on your area that you're working at on your body panel. It just could cause problems, and you don't want to have to waste your time and have to knock all that down and start over again. So with this board, I applied a small quantity of Bondo and then a very small quantity of hardener. And you got to read the instructions on the mixing ratio of the amount of hardener to add into your body filler. And it's a necessity to add that filler. And if you add too much, it's going to dry too fast and harden up like a rock before you even put it on your panel. And if you don't put enough, it's going to stay gummy and it's not going to dry. So, and you want to thoroughly mix it. So in this amount of Bondo filler I put, you saw the amount of hardener that I applied, and you just spread it. You spread it, and you don't want to get air bubbles. You want to get the air bubbles out. You don't want to do a chopping motion because that creates bubbles. I still need to improve on my technique because when I apply the body filler, after it cures, I still find little pinholes. And I can correct that with spot putty. I primer it and then I put spot putty. But that spot putty, it can only be applied on very small, light scratches or pinholes. You don't want to overdo it with that red spot putty. But anyways, back to this body filler. Um, we're in Central California. It's 100 degrees that I was working this day. And so you don't have a lot of time to mess around, and you got to get that body filler on your panel and start working it in. Otherwise, it's going to dry up on you, and you're going to have to just make another batch, which I had to do because it just dried up too fast. So when you spread it, you apply pressure, because you got to remember, you don't want to get any air bubbles, and you got to push all the air out, and you apply firm pressure, and you just keep on applying. This was kind of an odd curve, kind of rounded. It went almost like a ball. But I was kind of struggling a little bit on spreading the filler. I ended up just applying it a little bit thick, and I just decided to apply it a little thick, and then I'm just going to spend a little bit more time sanding it. And it was already drying up, so I just had to call it good right there and let it dry, and then just sand it down with 40 grit. As I sanded down this body filler, I started off with 40 grit sandpaper. I always use a sanding block. I have DuraBlock sanding blocks from Amazon, and then my sandpaper is adhesive back DuraGold from Amazon. And the 40 grit knocks down the filler fairly fast. And if you go down too far and you're not happy with the level that you've created on your sanding technique, you can always just make more filler and just add filler on top of your Bondo. And if you feel that you're not happy with the results, then just take the time to redo your work, because it's better just to catch it early than having a finished product that you're not happy with. So after the 40 grit sandpaper, I used 80 grit sandpaper to get rid of the 40 grit scratches. So after the 80 grit sandpaper, then I go to a finer grit sandpaper, which was a 180, and then I sanded it down lightly, and then I went to a 220 and a 320 and then a 400. Then it was ready for primer. And if there was any scratches, I was able to use spot putty to fill the scratches or pinholes, and then I lightly primered over the spot putty. And so it's a lot of sanding work and different stages of sandpaper, but I feel it's a necessity, because otherwise you're going to be having a product with a bunch of 40 grit after my sanding scratches, and it's not. I got a spray bottle with water and a little bit of Dawn soap and a very coarse Scotch-Brite pad, and I washed everything down with the Dawn soap and the Scotch-Brite pad, and I was really surprised and really happy with how clean it left the metal. And I rinsed it off with the hose. I let it dry, and before putting my primer, I also got a shop towel with wax and grease remover. I applied it to the shop towel, and then I wiped everything that was going to be painted with the wax and grease remover, and it left a nice clean surface. And then I was able to put my primer. My spray gun pressure, I kept all my pressure at about 28 psi, and I used a Harbor Freight spray gun and a 220 Husky 60-gallon Home Depot air compressor. And I was real happy with the results on the Harbor Freight spray gun, actually. Before applying my primer, I got a spray bottle with water and Dawn soap and a very coarse Scotch Brite pad, and I cleaned everything thoroughly, and I rinsed it off with water. I was happy with the cleaning results, and I got a wax and grease remover after it was dry, and the wax and grease remover on a shop towel. I wiped everything down just to make sure there was no contaminants or anything that I missed. And when I used my direct to metal primer, I sprayed 2 coats. I waited 15 minutes between coats. The Harbor Freight gun, PSI at 28, and I had a good fan pattern. I allowed the primer to dry. The 2 coats of primer. It waited 2 hours before I applied my base coat, and my base coat was at a 1-to-1 ratio with, for example, 6 ounces of base coat paint and 6 ounces of reducer. And I used slow reducer because in Central California we had 100-degree plus weather, so I used a slow reducer. And if it was wintertime, I would use a fast reducer. So there's a slow, medium, and fast reducers. And read all the specifications on the recommended manufacturers' mixing ratios on your paints. And when I did my clear coat, that one was a 2-to-1 ratio. So, for example, 6 ounces of clear coat and 3 ounces of reducer. And but all of the good products, they'll have the specifications labeled on how to use their product. And if you just follow those instructions on their specifications, then you should be fine. If you don't have an air compressor or a gun, and I think something like this, because it's underneath the cars, the gas tank, like a rattle can, like a good quality rattle can, even like a Rust-Oleum or something would be fine, and they would just make your overall project look a lot cleaner. Even though it's the gas tank, nobody's really going to see it, but then sometimes they might, And if you're going to the extent of repainting your car, cleaning up with new wheels and everything else, this was a little bit of work, but it was well worth the time because I was able to save a little bit of money, reuse the existing part, which was still good. It just was dingy and just needed to be cleaned up. So one important thing that I've been finding out as I'm doing some more painting is keep a consistent flow pattern or consistent speed. When you're pulling that trigger on that gun, keep the gun moving. Keep your distance consistent. I've been successful at about like a 10-inch distance from my panel that I'm painting. It could vary, I guess, depending on the products, and just keep that gun moving. And always remember that if you make a mistake, it can always be fixed. It's just going to take a little bit more time, a little bit more material, but it's really not a big deal. You just learn as you go, and hopefully this helps somebody on their next project. So be sure to keep your work area clean. Wash down your cement with water, and even your yard, and have some tweezers handy in case a mosquito or a bug lands in your paint. You can probably pluck it out and not have to redo your work. I use one gun for primer, paint, and clear. So between stages, I completely disassemble the gun, thoroughly clean it with acetone, and start off with the fresh gun every time I put new product in the paint gun to spray, and all those little things make a big difference on your overall final results of your work.